Once upon a time, there was a young girl named Alice who lived in a small cottage just at the edge of a vast wilderness. Alice spent most of her time frolicking in the woods and making friends with the many animals that lived there. Her parents were proponents of the passive parenting style and allowed Alice to pretty much do whatever her little heart desired. After one particularly joyous day spent in the woods, Alice returned to the cottage to wash off. Just as she skipped towards the bright yellow door that always welcomed her home, a summer storm rolled in overhead. As she stepped past the bubblegum pink balloons left over from her 8th birthday, she entered into the cozy tiled bathroom, reminiscing on her adventures in the woods. That day, Alice relaxed and let the cool water flow over her, ignoring the raging storm just outside her shower window. With a flash of light and a deafening clap of thunder, a lightning bolt shot down from the dark sky, hitting the small cottage and radiating through it. Quickly reaching the bathroom, the bolt of electricity spread through Alice's small 4-foot frame. Luckily, the lightning bolt seemed to have not significantly harmed Alice physically, but the fear that the shock instilled in her is likely to remain with her for years to come. Alice felt as though something had changed inside her, but she could never really tell exactly what. Her older sister noticed this change in Alice and stayed close by her side, wanting to protect her from any harm that may come her way.
The days passed by, and a few months later, the two sisters ventured out into the woods on a bright sunny day. Alice still held on to her phobia of thunderstorms, known as astrophobia, but luckily there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Wanting to find her animal companions, young Alice traveled deeper and deeper into the thickening forest. As she came across a rabbit hole, she peered inside, hoping to find a furry friend, but instead lost her footing and slid right in.
Landing on a soft bed of bright green moss, Alice wondered where she was and how she had gotten there. She quickly decided that wherever she was, it was absolutely beautiful and worth a good look around. As she walked along a winding trail, she came to a small stream, and realizing her thirst, decided it was safe to drink from. As the cool water touched her lips, Alice felt herself begin to shrink, smaller and smaller and smaller, until she thought she must have been only a few inches tall. Looking around for help, Alice spotted a man in peculiar clothing hurrying up the path. Alice attempted to get his attention as he approached, but he nearly ran right by due to Alice's miniature size. Realizing at the last moment that Alice was there, the man introduced himself as the Mad Hatter and offered his assistance. The Mad Hatter had lived in Wonderland for a very long time and knew the strange happenings of the place. When Alice introduced herself, the Mad Hatter knew at once that she must be the girl the prophecy spoke of. When the evil Queen of Hearts overpowered the White Queen and took over Wonderland many years ago, a prophecy was written that a young girl named Alice would come to save them all.
As the Mad Hatter looked up at the horizon, he saw the Queen's army marching in their direction, clearly aware that Alice had finally come to defeat her. Wanting to protect Alice, the Mad Hatter took off his top hat and put the small child on the brim of it and flung her with all his might. Before having to fling Alice to safety, the Mad Hatter had just enough time to explain to Alice why she was here and what she must do to save Wonderland and fulfill the prophecy.
Alice must first retrieve the sword that lies deep inside the castle, protected by the Queen Knights. This sword is the only thing that will be able to end all this evil in Wonderland and finish the Queen of Hearts off for good. Accepting the challenge, although fear still coursed through her, Alice did her best to steer the top hat towards the entrance of the castle. As Alice began venturing into the castle, the Queen of Hearts sat hysterically and unnerved, terrified that Alice would be successful in overthrowing her. Paranoid and shaking with fear, the Queen ordered that the sword be moved from its current location and placed directly next to her for safety. Auditory hallucinations due to her severe paranoid schizophrenia told her that she must kill Alice, or else she would be ruined forever.
Meanwhile, as Alice searched the castle for the sword, she realized how starved she was and quickly located some cake on a nearby table. She took a handful and shoved the cake in her mouth. As the sweet cake touched her tongue, Alice began to grow and grow and grow until she was over 10 feet tall.
It was impossible not to see her due to her height, and 2 knights quickly spotted her. The knights brought her to the Queen at once, but luckily the Queen did not recognize Alice and welcomed her. The Queen loved things that were odd and unusual, and Alice's height fascinated her. Meanwhile, just outside the castle, the Mad Hatter was wrought with anxiety. Without his top hat, he no longer felt like himself, and dissociative amnesia began to flow over him. He paced back and forth in front of the castle gates, trying to remember who he was and what he was supposed to be doing. Feeling as though he was in a dream, the Mad Hatter entered through the castle gates and found a top hat lying on the ground. He quickly picked it up and placed it upon his head, finally feeling as though he knew exactly who he was and what he needed to do.
Deeper inside the castle, Alice was still struggling with her Lilliputian hallucinations, and felt as though she might still be growing larger. Luckily for Alice, the Queen was in a good mood at this moment, but due to her bipolar disorder, this could change at the drop of a hat. As Alice glanced around the room, she spotted the glittering silver sword just on the other side of the Queen's chair.
The Queen saw Alice's glance, and it angered her into a raging tantrum. As the Queen closed her eyes to calm down and sent her knights to get her some water, Alice seized the opportunity and grabbed the sword. By the time the Queen opened her eyes, Alice was already sprinting out the door. "Off with her head!" screamed the Queen, suddenly realizing that the giant was really Alice. Hallucinations and delusions filled the Queen's head as she screamed for her knights to catch Alice.
With an entire army after her, Alice ran from the castle as fast as she could. She spotted the Mad Hatter as she ran through the gates, and he told her she must find the White Queen. Alice sprinted over to a stream and gulped down a handful of water. She immediately began to shrink smaller and smaller until she was once again only a few inches tall. The Mad Hatter picked up the sword, slid it into the top hat, scooped up Alice, put her on the brim of the hat, and flung the hat as hard as he could. Once again, the symptoms of the Mad Hatter's dispersonalization disorder flowed over him, and he no longer felt like himself. Alice landed with a thud on the cold ground and jumped off the hat.
As she looked up, she noticed that she had landed at the feet of none other than the White Queen herself. As she introduced herself, the White Queen informed Alice that all she needed to do to return to normal size was to change the way she thinks. Alice found this solution much too simple and questioned the White Queen, who replied that she was a cognitive behavioral therapist and could help Alice overcome the symptoms of Todd syndrome that affected her. The White Queen then explained that she could also help the Mad Hatter overcome his depersonalization disorder as well. Comforted by the White Queen's presence, Alice formed a plan to save Wonderland.
Making his way to where he thought Alice might have landed, the Mad Hatter ran into a man that appeared to be very distraught. The man introduced himself as Alice's father and explained that he was a mental health professional working in the biological perspective. He recognized the Mad Hatter's depersonalization disorder and prescribed him anti-anxiety medication before joining him to search for Alice. As they hurried along the trail, the Mad Hatter told Alice's father of all the evils of the Queen of Hearts.
Alice's father suggested that the Queen be given antipsychotic, anticonvulsant, and lithium medications to help relieve her paranoid schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. They soon spotted the magnificent White Queen with the young Alex next to her. The Mad Hatter retrieved this top hat and placed back upon his head, once again feeling like he was transcending out of a dream and back to being himself.
Alice informed them all of her plan to take down the evil Queen of Hearts, and they all agreed to help her. Having each contributed blood, sweat, and tears to accomplish the difficult task of fulfilling the plan, Wonderland was finally returned to its former glory.
Sunshine and rainbows flooded the land, and Alice rejoiced as the White Queen took back her rightful place as ruler of Wonderland. Alice and her father said their goodbyes to the Mad Hatter and the White Queen as they began their return home. Alice's father had noticed the symptoms of Todd syndrome in Alice and prescribed her beta blockers, anticonvulsants, and calcium channel blockers to help relieve her Lilliputian hallucinations, as well as anti-anxiety medications to help her cope with her intense phobia of thunderstorms. As a psychiatrist working in the biological perspective, Alice's father believed that the conditions of Alice, the Mad Hatter, and the Queen of Hearts were all treatable through medication with a focus on correcting the biological aspects of each condition. On the other hand, the White Queen believed that cognitive behavioral therapy was the path to take in the attempt to treat their diagnoses.
Finally returning to their small cottage on the edge of the forest, Alice and her father drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the day's adventures.
The end.